What if the darkest place you could imagine was also somehow the place where love was waiting? The ancient Greeks understood something that we have perhaps forgotten, that the world is not divided simply into light and shadow, but that these two forces are forever reaching for one another, forever incomplete without the other's touch. From their sun-warmed shores and olive groves, they whispered a story for centuries, a myth so old it was used to explain the very turning of the seasons, the reason flowers die and are reborn, the reason the earth itself seems to grieve. There is a goddess, and there is a king who rules a kingdom no living soul was ever meant to see. There is a flower, a crack in the earth, and a choice that will echo through eternity. There is pomegranate, and there is consequence. Welcome to the story of Hades and Persephone. Now lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. There was a time long before the first frost, when the world had never known sorrow. The meadows of the ancient land stretched wide and unhurried beneath a sky so blue it seemed to hum with warmth. Wild flowers leaned into the sun, violet and gold and the softest white, their petals heavy with the labor of bees. Rivers caught the midday light and scattered it like handfuls of silver coins. The mountains in the distance stood still and drowsy, their slopes thick with cedar and olive. The air smelled of warm earth and wild thyme, and everything that lived seemed to lean a little closer to the light. It was a world that had not yet learned the word for winter, a world full and flowering, moving slowly through its endless golden morning, unaware that somewhere, deep beneath its roots, a silence was waiting. Far above that flowering world, beyond the reach of wind and weather, sat Mount Olympus. Not the mountain of stone that mortals could see from the valleys below. That was only its hem, its lowest edge. The true Olympus rose beyond all clouds into a light that never dimmed and never shifted. There was no dawn there and no dusk, only a radiant, humming noon that had lasted since the beginning of everything. The air itself seemed to ring very softly, like a bronze bowl struck once and never allowed to go quiet. This was the seat of the gods, the fixed point around which the whole turning world arranged itself. And at the center of it all sat Zeus. He was vast, the way mountains are vast. Not threatening, simply large beyond comfortable reckoning. His hair was white and close curled, his beard full as a storm cloud, his skin the deep bronze of a man who has stood beneath every sun that ever rose. He sat upon his throne with the particular ease of someone who has never once been asked to move. One broad hand resting on the shaft of a golden lightning bolt, the way a carpenter rests a hand on a familiar chisel, not gripping, not threatening, simply resting. He was powerful the way weather is powerful, without intention, without apology. The hall arranged itself around him, and the light fell where he sat, and the world continued below, small and busy, and entirely unaware of how little he was watching it. Not far from there, in the world of light and growing things, another kind of power moved through a field of wheat. Demeter walked slowly, the way someone walks when they are not going anywhere in particular, when the walking itself is the point. Her robes were the deep gold of late harvest, the color of grain just before it bends heavy on the stalk, and her bare feet left soft impressions in the warm soil. She trailed her fingers across the tips of the wheat as she passed, and the stalks seemed to lean into her touch, the way children lean into a familiar hand. She was the reason bread existed, the reason a family could sit down together at the end of a long day and feel for a moment safe. Her joy was summer. Her grief, as the world would one day learn, was winter. But now there was only warmth and the field and the quiet golden afternoon. Not far from there, in a valley so hidden the wind itself seemed to forget it, Persephone was laughing. It was a soft sound, barely more than a breath, the kind of laughter that rises when no one is watching, and the moment is simply perfectly good. She moved through the meadow of Nysa the way water moves through open land, without hurry, without direction, following only what was beautiful. A narcissus here, white and still, a spray of violet there, tucked low against the earth, hyacinth in deep blue clusters that smelled of something almost too sweet to name. She gathered them loosely in the crook of her arm, pausing to study each one as though it had something quiet to tell her. She was young, luminous in the way of those who have not yet carried sorrow, and entirely wholly herself. The flowers seemed to lean toward her as she passed. She did not notice the stillness at the edge of the valley. She did not notice that something ancient had turned its gaze upon her. At the edge of the clearing, where the meadow grass gave way to darker soil, a single flower grew. It was not like the others, where they clustered and swayed in small, sociable groups. This one stood alone, white petals arranged around a heart of deep, trembling gold. Its fragrance was extraordinary, not sweet so much as overwhelming, the way a sound can fill a room until there is no space left for thought. Gaia had said it there. Zeus had asked, and so she had obliged, pressing the bulb into the earth with patient, ancient hands, a gift, a door disguised as a flower. It waited in the full white light of midday, perfectly still. Not far from there, on the hillside above the valley, Demeter stood and watched. She did not sit. She never sat when Persephone was below her and the world was open in every direction. She stood with her arms folded across her chest, her wheat blonde braid loose at her shoulder, and her eyes steady on the small, bright figure moving through the grass. This was her love, not gentle, not passing, but the deep and consuming kind. The kind that fills every hollow in a person until there is nothing left that does not belong to it. Demeter had poured herself season by season into her daughter's becoming. She did not yet know that love can become a kind of wall, that holding something close enough, long enough, can make the world feel small to the one being held. For now, She only watched, and the late sun laid its warm gold across the valley below. Below, the meadow was alive with them, the nymphs whose names have softened with time, Leucippe, Phaeno, Electra, and others whose faces blur now like reflections on moving water, moved through the flowers in loose, laughing circles. Their voices carried upward in bright threads of sound. They chased one another between the tall stems of asphodel and iris, their feet leaving no lasting mark on the grass. It was an ordinary afternoon, warm, unhurried, full of small happinesses. Those who would later try to remember it could only say, the light was golden, the laughter was real, and nothing yet had the weight of a last time. But beneath all of that golden afternoon, beneath the warm soil and the roots of the meadow flowers and the deep, slow stone of the earth itself, there was another world. It had no sun. It had no bird song. It had only the river Styx, which moved through absolute darkness the way a secret moves through a room, without sound, without haste, felt more than seen. The water was black, not the black of night, which still holds the memory of light, but the black of something that had never known it. And yet, along the surface, a faint shimmer drifted, pale blue, pale green, like a breath held just beneath glass. This was the boundary, the place where what lives ends and what has lived begins. Here, the silence was not empty. It was full of everything that had already passed through. And then, from the far darkness, he came, slowly, without sound. A narrow wooden boat moved across the water as though the water itself had simply decided to carry it. No ripple at the bow, no wake trailing behind. The man who steered it was old beyond the counting of years, lean as a winter branch, draped in rough brown cloth that hung from his shoulders like something the dark had woven for him. His hands, pale and skeletal, gripped the long pole with a patience so complete it had become a kind of silence all its own. Charon did not look up. He dipped the pole. He pulled, the boat moved on. This was his purpose, and his purpose was everything. He had done this since the first soul stood trembling at the water's edge, and he would do it long after the last. Beyond the river, the path opened into something vast and still. The fields of asphodel stretched in every direction. A pale gray plain of slender flowers, their white heads bowed as though perpetually listening for something they could no longer name. Shadows moved among them, not quickly, not with purpose, but the way smoke moves when there is no wind. These were the common dead, ordinary souls who had lived ordinary lives, neither wicked enough for punishment nor bright enough for paradise. They wandered here in a soft, slow forgetting, each one a faint impression of the person they had once been. They did not suffer. They did not weep. They simply drifted through the pale blooms like memories that no longer remembered whose they were, gentle and quiet, and endlessly peacefully lost. Not far from there, beyond the pale fields and the slow wandering of the forgotten, the palace of Hades rose from the black stone of the deep earth, like something the world had dreamed before it knew the sun. It was enormous. Its walls were carved from obsidian and ancient rock, smooth as still water, and through them ran veins of pale mineral light, white and cold and faintly luminous, tracing slow rivers through the dark, like moonlight caught inside stone. There were no windows, there was no wind. The great columns at its entrance stood without trembling, the vast doors sealed in perfect silence. It did not ask to be admired. It simply was immovable, unhurried, indifferent to the long centuries that had passed in its shadow. Beautiful the way a glacier is beautiful, complete the way silence is complete. And inside, on the great throne at the hall's far end, sat Hades. He was not what the living imagined. There was no rage in him, no cruelty coiled behind the eyes. He sat with one hand resting open on his knee, the other loose at his side, and he was simply still. His dark himation fell in heavy folds around him, the color of deep water where no light had ever reached. His face was composed the way stone is composed, not cold by intention, but long settled into its own shape. The iron braziers burned low on either side of him. Their light did not flatter, it only revealed. And what it revealed, if you looked carefully, was something the king himself perhaps could not name. Not anger, not pride, something older and quieter than either, an ache worn so smooth by time that it had ceased to feel like pain and had become, instead, simply the texture of his days, a longing, unnamed, unanswered, and very, very old. On certain nights, if night meant anything in a place where darkness never lifted, Hades would leave his throne and climb alone to the high chamber above the palace. It was a small room, almost bare, with a vaulted ceiling of black stone that curved overhead like the inside of a held breath. He would stand there, very still, and tilt his face upward. There was nothing to see, only rock, only the deep, indifferent weight of the world pressing down from above. Still, he looked. He had been given the greatest kingdom ever to exist, vaster than Olympus, older than the sea. Every mortal soul that had ever drawn breath would one day come to him. None came willingly. None came with joy. They arrived the way leaves arrive at the bottom of a river, carried by something they could not resist, wanting only to be elsewhere. He ruled everything. He was visited by no one. So he stood in the high chamber, face tilted toward stone, toward surface, toward a sun he had not felt in an age beyond counting. And the ache, smooth and old and quietly unbearable, held him there a moment longer. Far above, the meadow breathed in the full warmth of noon. Persephone had drifted as she sometimes did, away from the laughter of the others, drawn not by any thought, but by something quieter than thought. A color at the meadow's edge, a single bloom, standing alone in the long grass where the others did not grow. She knelt beside it. The narcissus was small and very still. White petals, soft as held breath, curled gently around a yellow center. She reached out, and her fingertips brushed its edge, barely touching the way one touches something almost too beautiful to disturb. The world around her was silent. No wind moved. The grasses did not sway. Even the light seemed to slow, pooling warm and golden over her outstretched hand. She did not pick it. She only rested her fingers there, against the petal, as if listening for something she could not yet name. Then the ground answered, not with violence, not with the roar of storms or the crack of thunder. It answered the way silence finally breaks, slowly, inevitably, like a breath held too long at last, released. A seam opened in the earth beneath her feet. Dark and deliberate, it widened from a whisper to a wound, splitting the meadow from within. The soil curled back at its edges. Flower stems trembled and tilted, their roots losing their hold, their white heads dipping forward into the dark as if bowing to something old and sovereign below. From that opening came cold, a cold that had nothing to do with wind, the cold of deep stone, of stillness untouched by sun for an age beyond memory. The smell rose with it, mineral and ancient, like the breath of the world's own marrow. The meadow held its silence. The dark below held its patience. Then the chariot came. First the horses, 4 of them coal dark and enormous, their pale eyes catching no light as they surged upward through the crack in the earth. They made no sound that belonged to living animals. Their hooves struck the meadow soil and left it scorched to silence. Behind them rose the chariot itself, iron and dark wood, its great spoked wheels grinding against the lip of the fissure as it cleared the rim and settled onto the grass. Dust and loose petals spun away from it in slow circles, and there stood Hades. He held the reins without urgency. His pale gray face was turned toward the open sky, not in wonder, not in hunger, but with the look of a man who has made a long and careful decision and is now, at last, carrying it through. There was no rage in him. There was only resolve, quiet and complete, as old and unmovable as the dark he had risen from. She fell, not slowly, the way a leaf falls, but fast, the way all certainty falls when the ground beneath it is gone. The flowers were still in her hand. She could feel their stems, cool and thin between her fingers, and she held them the way one holds the last familiar thing. Above her, the circle of sky grew smaller, blue and bright and merciless in its retreating. Sunlight pulled away like water draining from a bowl. She cried out, the sound left her body completely. It rose upward toward the meadow, toward the warm air and the open world she had known every day of her living. It was the purest sound she had ever made. Not a word, not a name, only the voice of someone who still belongs to the light, calling back to it as the cold rushes up from below to meet her. Then the earth closed, not with violence, not with sound. The lips of the fisher drew together the way a sleeper's eyes fall shut, slowly, without effort, without ceremony. The grass pressed back into place. A few petals, shaken loose in the upheaval, drifted down and settled among the stems as though placed there by a careful hand. The meadow was still. The sun held its position. The light was the same warm gold it had always been. Somewhere nearby, a bee moved from flower to flower, indifferent and unhurried. There was no wound, no scar, no darkness to mark the place where a girl had stood and cried out and been swallowed by the world beneath her feet. Only beauty, continuing on. That was the cruelest part. Demeter came into the meadow with her arms already open, already reaching. The way a mother's body moves before her mind has formed the thought. She had felt something, not heard, not seen. Felt it the way roots feel a change in water deep below the soil. The flowers were still there. The light was warm and soft and golden. Her daughter was not. She said Persephone's name once, quietly as though she might simply have looked away and missed her. Then she said it louder. Then she was calling it into the open sky, her voice breaking open like a stone struck hard, the sound scattering across the empty meadow and returning to her changed, hollow, unanswered. She moved between the flowers, touching nothing, looking at everything. Her bare feet pressed the warm grass. Her hands turned at her sides. Then she began to walk faster, then faster still, and then she was running, a goddess running through a silent and indifferent world, calling a name that no longer echoed anywhere on earth. The wheat felt it first. Stem by stem, field by field, the green drained out of the world. Stalks that had stood tall in the morning sun began to bow, not from wind, but from something deeper, something missing. Leaves curled at their edges as though trying to hold warmth that was no longer there. Fruit dropped from the branches before it had learned to be sweet, hitting the dry earth with a hollow sound. This was not anger. It was not punishment. It was simply the truth of what Demeter was. She had not chosen to hold the seasons in her hands. She simply did, the way a heart holds blood. And now her hands were empty, and the world grew cold without knowing why, only knowing that something essential had gone from it. So she walked, not as a goddess, not as the keeper of grain and the mother of green things, but as an old woman in a gray cloak, dusty at the hem, her wheat gold hair hidden away, her bare feet learning the hard grammar of mortal roads. She moved through villages at dusk, when the light was the color of ash and the dogs lay still in doorways. She knocked on low wooden doors. She asked the same question each time, softly, with a patience that had nothing gentle behind it, only endurance. Had anyone seen a girl? Dark hair, white chiton, wild flowers? Nobody had. Still she went on, through the empty market squares, past the dried-out wells, along the roads between settlements that had once smelled of rain and ripe wheat, and now smelled of nothing at all. There was a strange, terrible dignity to it, a goddess reduced to asking, to wandering, to hoping. She carried no warmth with her now, only the question. Far below all of that, below the wandering, below the grief, below the last dry road and the last unanswered question, Persephone stepped from the chariot onto black stone. She still held the flower, a single pale bloom, its petals already losing their color, as though the light that had made them beautiful simply could not follow her here. She stood very still. There was no wind, not a breath of it. The air did not move at all. It simply rested against her skin, cool and complete, like the inside of a sealed jar. There was no smell of soil, no rustle of leaves, no distant murmur of water. The river Styx lay nearby, but even it made no sound. It only shone faintly, coldly, in the darkness. This was a place where nothing grew. She could feel that, the way you feel the absence of something beloved before you can name what it is. She did not hear him approach. That was perhaps the most unsettling thing. Not his presence, but the silence of it. One moment the entrance hall was empty. The next he was there. Hades stood at the edge of the pale light, tall and still, as though he had grown from the stone itself. He did not speak. He did not command. He simply looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable beneath that heavy brow. And then slowly he stepped forward. He raised his hand, not to seize, not to point or dismiss or gesture with the authority of a king. He held it open, palm upward, in the dim mineral glow, the way a person offers something they are not certain will be received. Almost formal, almost shy, the most powerful God in all of creation, sovereign of every soul that had ever lived and died, waited in the quiet dark with his hand outstretched, and said nothing at all. She stepped inside. The throne room opened before her like a held breath, vast and still and dark in a way that was not emptiness, but weight. Black columns rose on either side, each one taller than any tree she had ever known, carved from stone the color of deep water. Iron braziers threw their low amber light in pools across the floor, and between those pools lay shadow so complete It seemed almost solid. At the far end stood the throne itself, dark, enormous, simple in the way that only the most absolute things are simple. Persephone did not speak, she only looked. There was no cruelty here that she could name, no bones, no wailing, none of the horrors the old stories promised. Only grandeur and quiet and the particular kind of loneliness that fills a room built for one. Hades moved to the edge of his throne and rested one hand against its arm, not sitting, not quite standing, somewhere between the two, as if the posture itself were habitual to a man who had never learned ease. Every soul, he said, his voice low and deliberate, that has ever drawn breath in the world above. They come here in the end, every shepherd who ever watched the stars, every mother, every king who believed his name would last forever. He paused. I hold all of them. There was no boast in it. Or rather, the pride was so old and so solitary that it had become something else, something closer to the weight a mountain feels, simply by standing. They do not suffer here, he continued. Most of them only rest. His dark eyes moved across the far columns, as if reading something written there long ago. But none of them stay with me. He led her from the throne room without another word, deeper into the palace, down a passage that curved gently away from the great hall like a river finding its own way. The corridor narrowed, then opened, and Persephone stopped. A garden lay before her, not the garden of the upper world, green and loud with bees and birdsong, but something altogether quieter. Pale flowers bloomed along low stone beds, their petals white as river fog, luminous in a way she could not explain. Silver trees rose in still rows, their leaves barely wider than a thumbnail, each one catching the faint mineral light of the walls and holding it softly. Stone fountains stood at the garden's heart, shallow basins where water rested without rippling, as smooth and dark as a held breath. Hades said nothing about it. He walked ahead of her along the path between the flowers, hands at his sides. But the narrator knows what he will not say. He had made this place long before she came, planting and shaping it across years of silence, in the slow, certain way that hope sometimes moves through a person before they have named it as hope at all. Persephone moved among the pale flowers alone now, trailing her fingers along their petals as she went. They were soft in a way she had not expected. Not the soft of sun-warmed things, but something cooler, stiller, like cloth that has never seen wind. She knelt at the edge of one low stone bed and cupped a single bloom in her hands. Her touch was the same touch she had used in the meadow above, the same careful, wondering hands. Yet the grief that lived in those hands had not gone. It had simply made room. That is the strange mercy of wonder. It does not ask grief to leave. It only sits beside it, quietly, and holds the same flower. She turned the bloom slowly in her fingers. Its pale light did not flicker. Down here, nothing flickered. Everything simply was, and remained, and waited, as she was beginning slowly to do. Not far from where she knelt, on a low table of gray stone, worn smooth by ages of stillness, sat a pomegranate. It had been there some time. No one had placed it with ceremony. No one had spoken over it. It simply rested there, dark red and heavy, its skin pulled taut as though something inside pressed gently outward, insisting, quietly, on being noticed. In the dim light of the chamber, its color was almost black. Almost, but not quite. Turn it toward the faint mineral glow of the walls, and there it was, that deep, wine-dark red, rich as old velvet, gleaming softly at the curve of its cheek. One side had split open just a little. A small wound, a seam of crimson. Through it, the seeds lay visible, each one a tiny glistening thing, each one a world in miniature, dark and sweet and waiting. She reached out and took it in both hands. It was heavier than she had expected. Or perhaps she had simply never held anything so full of consequence before. The split seam gave a little under her thumb, widening, and the smell of it rose to meet her, dark and sweet and faintly mineral, like something grown in stone-softened soil, far from any sun she had ever known. She did not eat out of hunger. She had not truly been hungry in all her time here. She did not eat from ignorance either. She had heard the old warnings carried inside her like a stone in still water, small and smooth and always present. She ate because she chose to. 6 seeds, one by one, slowly, in the silence of that small chamber, each one cool between her lips, each one leaving its dark sweetness on her tongue like a word she had finally decided to say aloud. What that choosing meant, she alone would ever fully know. The dark held her gently. She did not pull away. Not long after, something warm disturbed the cold air of the underworld palace entrance. It was small at first, a flutter, the soft percussion of feathered wings, and then Hermes landed on the black stone with a lightness that seemed almost to offend the place. His winged sandals stilled themselves. He stood in the amber throe of the torch brackets, breathing the heavy, breathless air of a kingdom that had no need of breath. His expression was careful. He carried the weight of Zeus's command, like a man carrying a lantern into someone else's home, knowing he was not entirely welcome, but certain he must go in regardless. Hades watched him come. He did not rise from his throne. He did not need to. He sat as he always sat, very still, very straight, one hand resting on the cold arm of the stone seat, as though he had grown there over centuries, which in a way he had. Hermes spoke the words plainly. He was young enough and wise enough to know that decoration would not soften them. What passed across Hades' face was not rage. It was not the crumbling of a man betrayed. It was something quieter and older than either. A kind of slow, deep recognition. The way a man looks when the thing he feared most arrives not as a catastrophe, but simply as a Tuesday, as an inevitability that had always been waiting, patient as stone, just outside the door. He had ruled alone for so long. Solitude had been his atmosphere, the very air of him, and now it would be so again. They stood together at the great doorway, not quite inside, not yet beyond. The pale mineral light of the palace walls fell softly over them both, and the passage opening behind Persephone breathed with a distant coolness, as if the world above were already reaching down for her. She did not turn toward it. Not yet. Hades looked at her the way a man looks at something he has committed to memory. Carefully, deliberately, the way you study a thing you know you will need to recall in the long, dark afterwards. His expression did not break. It simply held. She reached up and pressed her fingers briefly against his jaw. A small gesture, quieter than words. He let her. Neither of them spoke of love. Neither of them needed to. What lived between them now was older than language. It was the kind of knowing that settles into the bones and stays there, patient and permanent, like warmth left in stone long after the fire has gone. She walked into the dark. The passage rose before her, a long throat of black stone, narrow at first, the walls close enough to feel their cold breath on her arms. Below, the pale mineral light of the palace grew smaller with every step. Above, nothing. Only dark. Then, a pinprick. She kept walking, and the pinprick widened, softening from white to the faintest gray gold, the color of something remembered. The stone walls warmed beneath her fingertips. The air, which had been still and mineral and old, began to move, a slow exhale at first, then something with direction, something purposeful. Wind, real wind, carrying with it the smell of soil and distance and the green, growing world. She stopped for only a moment. Her face was open, not joyful, not grieving, but the way a face looks when it holds two true things at once. She was moving toward the world she had loved. She was leaving the one that had learned to love her. She breathed in. She kept walking. And then Demeter saw her. She had been walking since before the light, moving across the barren hillside with the blind certainty of a mother who has run out of places to search and cannot stop searching anyway. Her wheat blonde braid was loose. Her feet were bare against the cold ground. She stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The dawn sat between them, pale and still, as if it too were holding its breath. Then Demeter crossed the distance in the way that grief crosses distances, without grace, without hesitation, and gathered her daughter into her arms. She did not speak. There were no words shaped for this, only her hands pressing against Persephone's back as though making sure she was solid, real, truly returned. Persephone held her just as tightly. Her face was pressed into her mother's shoulder, and she smelled grain and warmth, and something ancient she had carried in her memory all through the long dark. Slowly, the hillside softened around them. A thread of green pushed up through the pale soil, then another still, and then the world remembered. Not slowly, not with hesitation. It came all at once, the way a held breath releases, sudden, rushing, grateful. Wheat pushed up through the cracked earth in long green rows, reaching for a sun that had been waiting. Trees shook out their new leaves like travelers shaking dust from their cloaks after a long road. Rivers that had run slow and gray turned clear and cold and bright, catching the early light in flashes. Bees returned to flowers that had opened in the night, as though neither had ever doubted the other. The fields ran gold and green from hill to valley and back again. The smell of warm soil rose across every plain. Birds called from branches that had only hours before stood bare and silent. The world was not returning to what it had been. It was becoming something it had nearly forgotten, alive, deeply and wholly alive, with the particular joy of something long lost and at last found again. And far below all of that, below the greening fields and the bird song and the warm returning light, Hades sat alone on his throne. The palace was quiet. It was always quiet, but the quiet felt different now, the way a room feels different after someone has lived in it for a while. Something of her remained in the stillness. A trace of pomegranate rested on the stone table beside him, dark and small and real. He did not grieve. That was the difference. He had known grief before, the long, hollow kind that has no shape and no end. This was not that. This was waiting, and waiting, he was slowly learning, had a direction to it. A soft forward lean, a knowledge that the thing you are waiting for will come. She would return when the world above had had its fill of warmth and harvest, when the light began to soften and the leaves let go. She always would. So it was that the seasons became the oldest love story ever told. The world grows cold because he is waiting. The world blooms again because she comes back, and somewhere deep beneath the sleeping earth, Hades rests, and the waiting is enough.